And we're live. Excellent. So, welcome everyone for this webinar. Uh, if you would just give a few minutes for some stragglers to come in, we're going to give it a minute before we really kick things off with a quick introduction to our wonderful panelists here. So, just bear with us for a minute, please. All right. I think that's about quorum. So, hi everyone, and welcome to this the latest and greatest green story webinar on the use and misuse of data and life cycle assessment, or LCA, in fashion. Uh, we're joined here by an illustrious panel, which I'm going to shortly introduce. But at its core, what this webinar is about is the data problem that fashion faces. Misinformation or bad data has had ripple effects across the fashion industry and beyond. It's hindering a brand's ability to understand their own impact and communicate it to consumers and stakeholders, stalling meaningful progress towards environmental impact reduction and achieving companies' goals. So LCA has emerged as a leading tool towards all of this. And what we will be looking at discussing is how LCA has been used and misused around fashion sustainability, the claims, and the role that LCA plays in general in measuring the environmental impact of fashion. So for this, apologies for the lighting here, it keeps going on and off. uh, so for this webinar, we're joined by two illustrious panelists, Dr. Muthu and of Green Story and Katina Boutis of Everlane. Just to quickly introduce myself before that, I'm the co-founder and president of Green Story. And what Green Story does as a platform is we transform product sustainability data into commercial results. At our core, we basically use the concept of LCA to help you gain credible, verifiable, accurate product sustainability data, show it in a transparent way, and present it to your consumers in a way that people can understand. So that's all about Green Story and myself. And without any further ado, let me start off with the introductions. Katina, maybe you can quickly introduce yourself.
Sure. So, hi everyone, and thank you so much for having me here. My name is Katina Boutis, and I'm the Director of Sustainability at Everlane. And for those that don't know or aren't familiar with Everlane, our company, we are a direct-to-consumer contemporary lifestyle brand, and we're really built around the mission to empower people to live their best lives with the least impact on the planet. So we really recognize that fashion can be a dirty business, and our primary goal is to leave the industry cleaner than we found it. And in my role as Director of Sustainability, my team and I are really responsible for both our social impact and environmental responsibility initiatives. So we see two sides of that coin being really integrated and important towards the work that we're doing for ourselves and hopefully making an impact in the industry as well. So within this, we've developed a three-pillar approach that's guiding a lot of our efforts in sustainability, and I think really will tie into the topic that we're speaking about today. But our pillars are keep Earth clean, keep Earth cool, and do right by people. So we're really centering our work around both environmental and social impact endeavors. So thank you.
Awesome.
Awesome. Dr. Muthu?
My name is Dr. Kannan Muthu, and I'm working as a Chief Sustainability Officer at Green Story. Prior to Green Story, I led the Environmental Services Division for Asia for SGS, and afterwards, I was Head of Sustainability at SGT Group, and I gained my PhD in Environmental Lifecycle Assessment in textiles and clothing from Hong Kong Polytechnic University in 2008. And I'm a textile technologist. I did all my studies from diploma till masters from premier institutes of India. I gained my master's, bachelor's, diploma, all from textile and apparel technology. Then I did work for a few industries in India. Then I came to Hong Kong in 2008 in pursuit of my doctorate. And 2008, I started my PhD in life cycle assessment. Since then, I've been dwelling in the ocean of LCA, so almost more than a decade. And I have almost 140 scientific books to my credit and over 100 publications to my credit as well. And I have almost 12 years of experience working in environmental and chemical sustainability, including LCA. And I worked with hundreds of factories in Asia, Europe, and Africa even, and US. And I did work with a lot of brands to develop strategies, implementing strategies across the entire supply chains with many materials. And I've done a lot of LCAs, and I'm part of many critical reviews of LCAs done by other folks in the sector. That's all about myself. Thank you. So pleased to talk about this very important topic. As Akhil has introduced very briefly about this, and I'm sure he will take us, take us about this topic in a deep dive way. So we'll talk about misuse. Let me begin with misuse and use of data in pertaining to LCA in fashion. So I'm very excited to share my insights and so far experiences, whatever I've gained for more than a decade with all of you. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. Thank you both, Katina and Dr. Muthu. So appropriately enough, the first question is going to be quite open. You're both experts in the space of LCA, both especially in its implementation in fashion. So as you also have a wider scope in terms of how LCA is being implemented. So when you see LCA fitting into the fashion industry, what's the role that you see both from a company perspective and a broader industry perspective? Maybe Katina, you can start off.
Sure, happy to. I think primarily the way that we are approaching LCAs and LCA methodology for our brand and for the industry is really as a framework and a helpful tool for which to measure and understand our environmental impacts for either a material or a product. I think there are different ways that you can approach it, but the way that we have specifically done this is on a product level basis. So quantifying everything from the raw material inputs to the processes that are used in the creation of that product to the fuels and other inputs that get the materials and the products from start to finish in many different forms. So we really see the methodology of LCA as being able to provide, I think, a great deal of depth and specificity about a particular product at a particular point in time or a particular supply chain that we've set up with very specific materials and methodologies. So we really see this as, I think, a useful and powerful tool for, first of all, being able to measure your impacts across a number of different environmental indicators and impacts. Being able to gain that specificity and accuracy and depth of measurement. So this LCA is not necessarily a tool for a best estimation or a directional understanding. You really do get into the meat of various different decisions around a product build. And then I think third, to really understand and identify where your biggest impacts are, or what we call hotspots. So we use this idea of hotspot analysis across our LCA work that we've done. That helps us inform our strategy, our sustainability strategy broadly, but also the specific decisions that we're making around mitigation for how to improve across different environmental impacts. So we're really using this as kind of a tool for just understanding and learning and deep dives into various materials and products. But I think if used responsibly, LCA data and details can also really be used as a way to educate and build awareness around specific impacts around materials and products. I know that this is a really hot topic in our industry because, of course, we are producing materials and products day in and day out. That's sort of the bread and butter of what we do. And so being able to understand those impacts and not just understand them for our own perspectives and uses, but be able to communicate that to our customer base is really, really important. So not to belabor that point, but at Everlane, we do have one of our biggest and long-term goals, and it goes back to one of those pillars I was talking about keep Earth cool. We do have a long-term goal to minimize our carbon dioxide emissions by over 50% by 2030, and that's based on our 2019 baseline. So we have actually gone through the work of performing a number of life cycle assessments on key products so that we can really understand where our impacts are happening and be able to make informed decisions around where we can focus our intervention efforts to really minimize and remove unnecessary emissions throughout our value chain and throughout our product. So that's sort of broad, but then very specifically how we are using LCAs and where I think that they have really important and impactful ways of falling into our business.
Awesome, thank you. Dr. Muthu?
Okay, she has answered most of my answers, what I prepared to answer for this question. But let me also cover a few aspects. See, the industry, the entire textile and fashion sector is in need of scientific and a credible assessment, given with all the, green legislations which the industry has to follow. And a lot of requirements have been stipulated. So to meet all this and also to avoid greenwashing. So if you look at any social media page, most of the LCAs done in the fashion sector are critically analyzed or criticized. One of the major reasons why they are criticized, it's because of many reasons. One of the chief reasons is that not following the holistic approach. So I would say that LCA absolutely sets a path to have scientific and credible assessments on a holistic approach. I would say so far the industry is used to have, and it's been a non-holistic approach has been followed. For example, factory level. So I go to a typical factory, let's say I do a supply chain assessment in terms of, let's say, environmental management systems, how energy is managed, again, with greenhouse gas emissions, water use, wastewater treatments, air emissions, waste management, be it hazardous and non-hazardous, then complete chemical management. So, this comes, this in-house as a particular factory, or, you can just scope it to a supply chain, a particular supply chain. But, or you can also do it for a specific process. For example, I have an innovative process within finishing or within dyeing. But again, taking all that, assimilate everything to a complete product, complete spectrum of the entire supply chain, which again leads to a product level or product specific assessments. You have no other choice except LCA. So you have to go for it. So I would conclude this way that use it a way to reach consumers and educate them. Also, talking about credit to gate. So what are the impacts, which we can, I mean, from a factory's perspective, supply chain's perspective, what can be measured, what can be mitigated, what can be alleviated to the maximum possible extent. So these are all lying in the boundary of a manufacturer or the supply chain partners. So once a product leaves a gate, let's say cradle to gate, after the gate, mostly it has to be done with the customer side. So here, the education comes in terms of, see, this is the impact from cradle to gate. Let's say 3 kilogram CO2 equivalents for my t-shirt, what I'm wearing, for example. And then afterwards, if you do it this way, whether to make it or to break it, to cherish or to perish, it's all lying in your hands. So, Green Story is all about educating consumers and, making consumers know and reduce their impacts. So, if you want to achieve this goal, and be it for any brand, any retailer, the ultimatum comes in terms of alleviating the impacts, not only from cradle to gate, it's for the entire spectrum, cradle to grave. So that this is going to be possible only with LCA, and I don't see any other better choice which can have a holistic approach and holistic perspective to measure and to mitigate the impacts across the entire life cycle phase of a product.
Absolutely. So, I mean, both of you really echoed each other there. But one thing that really sticks out is that idea of really covering an entire product's journey and the supply chain. And as you're both probably aware, the data is probably the most complex thing and the hardest thing to get when you're when you're doing any of this. So, and especially with brands, Katina, there's obviously a big struggle in terms of getting the right data and making it credible. So, how are you kind of dealing with that? And what's the best practices approach for you?
Yes, this is a great question because I think anyone who has been involved in any type of LCA process will tell you that the data gathering portion of it is the most time consuming and probably also the most grueling. It's really tough, and especially for a study like an LCA, which is highly scientific and really complex, you have to ensure that the integrity of your data is credible and is accurate and precise to the best of your abilities. So of course, from a brand perspective, we are really reliant on our upstream suppliers to be able to supply us with that integrity of data for what we're asking. So I think, first and foremost, you have to have a level of traceability and transparency and just understanding of who your upstream supply chain partners are before you can even start. So there's almost like the step before the information gathering step of really mapping out that value chain and knowing from the farm or the initial kind of processing unit all the way through to that, whatever you define your gate to be, who all of the actors are and where you need to go to find that that data and ensure that it is from a reliable source. I think past that point, what we really like to stress is partnership, because none of this would be possible, at least for us. We're a brand that doesn't own any of our manufacturing facilities. We really do rely on all of the partners in our upstream chain for all of their primary data, essentially. So you have to lead with this idea of partnership. I think whenever you go to any type of facility or even at the farm level with these highly detailed questionnaires about the amount of fuels that they're using, the amount of water that they're pumping, what their effluent looks like, and what type of waste management systems and practices and measurements that they have within the confines of their whatever their process is, it can become probably scary. I mean, I'm sure, I liken it to, some type of audit or something. If anybody's asking you extremely detailed questions about your processes, I think there can be an element of fear or misunderstanding about why somebody might be asking you these questions. So it takes a lot of time and effort, I think, to set up this spirit of partnership to say, we're just doing this because we really want to learn and we want to understand. And this is not, we're not going to, slap anybody on the wrist. We're not going to take business away for whatever we find or kind of learn through this process, but we need to have the accuracy of details and the data available so that we can just learn together and move forward together. So we really try to stress this idea of partnership, knowing that the primary data that we really need to have accurate and verifiable results lies with these upstream partners. So it's really all about the spirit of partnership and transparency and learning together to make changes for our industry.
Yeah, and a very fair point. And I think a structured approach is something that's really needed in there. And one thing that we've seen, Dr. Muthu, especially since you started with Green Story, is the implementation of that approach. So it'll be awesome if you can shed a bit more light on that as well.
Absolutely. But I would like to thank and acknowledge what Katrina has said. Very valid points. And in fact, I have faced all these, sense of fear the moment we go with the questionnaire. I remember when I did my first LCA study in 2008 in one of the factories in China. Imagine being an Indian, I can't speak Chinese. So Google was not that developed with Google Translate. So I went with the first questionnaire. People used to run. Oh, this guy is coming with a big questionnaire. And that time LCA was not developed. You'll be surprised. We used to measure emissions to water, emissions to air, wholesome. We don't have the breakup. So we have to get this. Then, I used all the softwares on earth since 2008. So that time, that was very simple questionnaire. But what we have is a very comprehensive questionnaire today. But I remember the 2008 questionnaire, what I developed, maybe one page, but still people used to run. So Katina, I think industry has not changed. Still, the sense of fear is there, but I would say that it has, trimmed down thanks to people like you, who are motivating supply chain partners, and also, all the, different factories and different stakeholders who are engaged with. So yeah, with that, let me tell my experiences. Since 2011, I've been with the industrial context in measuring the impacts of products with LCA. Actually, it should have been other way around. We should have got all the audits, environmental audits, chemical audits first, then we should have done LCA. But maybe in my experience, it was reversed. First, when I started after my PhD, I started doing all the product level assessments. We used to do packaging impacts, carbon footprints, environmental footprints with LCAs. That time, even carbon footprint standards were not even developed. We had only 14040. That's our Bible. Anything you want to measure, water footprint, ecological footprint, carbon footprint, anything we want, only 14,040. And 44 was also not that much recognized, only 40. Anyway, so we began with that. Then slowly we started having, many environmental assessments, chemical assessments, and so on. So since then, I've been convincing people of many levels, starting from directors, even to, manufacturing segment heads, even to the people who are engaged with collecting data, or who are people who are, responsible to give the data. So, my job was, it has been, convincing many actors who are required to give LCA. So my answer to this question is going to be, when a brand wants to roll out, or when a retailer wants to roll out, even a manufacturer wants to roll out the LCA. I did work with a lot of manufacturers. First, my suggestion is going to be, don't kick things off with a fully scaled out approach. See, typically in a textile sector, you have like thousands of products, and LCAs are typically modeled this way, or made this way. So if you have let's say a print for a t-shirt, and tomorrow you don't have print in the same t-shirt, it has to be different. So when we talk about all this, people, we talked about sense of fear, so that really goes to a greater scale. So don't start with the full scaled approach. Maybe begin with a small array of products. So I always tell them, get out, let's say, a dozen of products or half dozen of products from your shelf, and try to measure the entire supply chain, as Katina has rightly pointed out. Go to a tier 1, 2, including 3, whatever your invisible tiers are. Of course, this definition varies from many brands. I'm sure Katina, she might be having a different definition from her brand's experience. So it differs, of course. What I want to tell you is that cover the entire spectrum of supply chain. Again, go with primary data. Try to collect as much as you can. Maybe begin with cradle to gate approach. And here the biggest difference I want to tell you is that go with the qualified team to start with. This team will make the entire difference from the LCS, what I have seen so far. A lot of textile LCS, I must have seen, produced, reviewed, maybe, numerous LCS so far. I have reviewed many LCS, with journals, with industrial LCS, critical reviews, and my team has done, even I have done myself, review for my books, enormous reviews I've done for textile LCS. I must have record one point, that most of the textile LCS, the moment we go through, we can understand that there is no textile sense. So it's not done by textile experts. And textile materials are very unique. I'm sure most of the attendees are from textiles. You all know what I mean. So I have also done LCS for many other products, pharma products, automobiles, packaging, paper, PCBs. Being a vegetarian, I did LCA for all meats one can think of on earth. Textile LCS are entirely different. Here we talk about functional aspects, physical aspects, chemical aspects, ecological aspects, and parameters linked to LCS. If you just touch upon only LCS without no bearing on textile, skill sets into that, I would say that LCS is not going to bring anything meaningful to the entire scientific fraternity, or to the one who wants meaningful results derived out of LCA. So what I want to tell you is that textile skills have to be by LCA practitioner who is doing LCA of a particular textile product. Pick the right experts who combine textile and LCA skills. That's the key. And then get a sense of your entire supply chain. covering all the tiers, all the way from cradle to gate. You have a complete sense, and you'll know everything else. Maybe we'll speak about it later. About maybe if there's a chance to speak about this in any of the forthcoming questions, we'll try to speak about this. Then once this is done, so you have a clear pathway of your supply chain. You have a clear sense of your footprints, be it carbon footprint, be it different indicators, or maybe one indicator for that matter. So you have a clear sense of what is your footprint from cradle to gate. What are your low hanging fruits? What are your hotspots? You have a clear sense. Then you roll this out to the next stage, gate to grave. Here comes the biggest challenge. Generally, textile LCS before my PhD, they are all gate to grave. People try to assume, and from my PhD I wanted to change. No, you can't assume consumer behavior. For example, typically we say that a t-shirt has to be used for 52 times, for example 60 times. Tell me how many people are doing it. How many of us are doing this? Akhil, do you use your t-shirt 60 times? I don't
I
think
might be
so.
the exception, but my wife keeps telling me I need to buy new t-shirts, so that's different.
So yeah, so you're influenced by your wife. So you are not meeting the functional limits. Same with me. Even though I speak about n number of things, even my kids say, "Dad, one thread has unraveled. This color has bit oozed out. Don't use it. Gone." So we are not doing it. So assumptions are not like maybe there could be some exceptions. I must say they are not going to be generalized. So my advice is you have to know the pulse of your consumers, and I have administered a lot of consumer surveys for a lot of textile LCS. So get the pulse of your customers, talk to them, find out how many times they use it, how do they take care of the product, how do they use it, or are they really thinking of longevity, or they think of proper disposal measures. Get this, put it in your models, talk to the your right experts, tell them, and they will help you with doing a proper LC. And in fact, we have done enormous cradle to grave LCS with consumer bearing surveys from Green Story. Then you have a complete sense of cradle to grave, and roll out this methodology. Just replicate again. As far as my intervention with a lot of manufacturers, brands, and retailers are concerned, they first when we talk about LCA plans rolling out, bit scary, but once you do it for a first set of products, let's say a dozen of products, rolling out for the next array of your products, that's going to be very easy. Even for the LCA practitioners, it is going to be really easy. They're just going to replicate the model and talk to the experts who have really have huge experience, so it will be very easy for them to roll it out. So this is how it this is how it can be scaled. See, one of the major issues which industry is facing is also scaling the LCS. So for that, we have a lot of technological revolutions. Green Story also has a technology revolution. I'm sure Akhil will give glimpses, a few glimpses towards this. And this is, the technological revolution can make this happen. And this is where I would say that brands can get better and more credibility. Not only brands, even manufacturers who were involved in administering a LCA study would be able to get better and more credible data.
Right. So that is a thank you for that, and that's a very comprehensive answer from both of you. So if I just were to summarize it really quickly, like I think the idea is to start small, right, and really dig into the data, especially from a cradle to grave approach where you have this. Make sure that your vendors, the people that you're working with, really understand what you're doing. You build the relationship, and over time enrich this information through getting more primary data, and extend the scope out gradually, adding more supply chains, adding more products, and then extend going from cradle to gate to cradle to grave through really again, like similarly building partnerships uh, with your suppliers. You're building partnership with your customers at that point, and kind of building this out. And there's the whole aspect right now, there's a lot of technology that's in space, including Green Story, which enables that traceability and enables that scalability once you have the processes in place. So hopefully that was a fair assessment. Uh, Give me feedback on LinkedIn. If not, we'll see. uh, awesome. Well, thank you so much for both those answers. Katina, you already answered this a little bit before, but if you're taking all of this and LCA is one aspect, in a sense, a very strong aspect of sustainability, how do you then embed that to guide your sustainability kind of journey as you move forward with your with what Everlane is doing and what you've done with several other brands before?
Yeah, so I think the way that we're using it really is that tool to help us understand and inform the work that we're doing. So I think Dr. Muthu really explained kind of the processes very well of how specific, like the example of the print versus not print. There are like very specific details within these life cycle assessments that can lead to that level of depth and specificity, which I think can be so important, specifically if you have product that is really integral to your brand. So the way that we've tried to do this at Everlane is to choose a set of, and we've chosen 6 different products that we've done in-depth LCAs on, is to choose 6 products across different categories that are all hugely important to our brand and to our revenue, which also means that it's important to our customer and important to the work that we're doing. So we've done these 6 different studies, in-depth analyses on products that are hero and key to our brand to really understand and map out where our impacts occur. So that's that kind of hot spotting analysis that we've done, and try to identify trends and understand where we can make meaningful contributions across these bigger goals that we've set out for ourselves. So I mentioned our greenhouse gas goals that we have for 2030, and we've set these pretty aggressive goals for ourselves against the Science-Based Targets Initiative, because we know how hugely important this is to our global society and ecology and everything that we're doing, from natural resource consumption and water and chemistry to the emissions that it all produces. So we've had this incredible depth of knowledge to be able to look across the spectrum of all of these supply chain impacts, from the raw material inputs to different processes, whether we're talking about wet processes or spinning or manufacturing, and trying to see where we can take where we can have the biggest impact for a brand of our size, and wherever we might be able to have that power, and where we might need help and support from others who either are operating in our shared supply chain, or where we need to take another partnership approach with our manufacturing base that we're using. So one of the key ways that we've identified moving forward, and this is something that we are really aggressively working towards through 2025 and beyond, is our raw material use. So within the spectrum of the material profile that we have and we consume every year that we're producing our products with, we know that there are better sources that have lower water inputs, lower energy profiles, lower emissions outputs across the board. So we're working really diligently right now to address this area of where we do have direct control, so our designers, our development teams can say, we choose, a recycled option of something over a virgin. And so we're really able to have that kind of direct control over our material choices. That's kind of our step 1. After step 1, or kind of in conjunction with step 1, we are also working on a much longer term strategy for how we address the energy consumption and electricity consumption of our manufacturing partners. So we've identified that many of our wet processing units and practices and processes are where we have the highest amount of impacts. Of course, unfortunately, these are a few steps removed from where we tend to have our direct relationships. So lots of people talk about your tier 1 manufacturers. This is who's, like stitching together, cutting and sewing your garments. That's usually where we have our best relationships, because we talk to them every day. We're giving them direct orders. So we have a really strong relationship with these facilities, but that's often not where our biggest impacts are occurring. So we actually have to work further upstream, where some of our relationship, but also our business volume is a bit diminished. So we don't have as much power or influence to say, hey, dye house, who is dyeing or washing all of our denim, or majority of our denim, we really need you to work on, these different solutions, so that we can help you, help us, help everyone kind of lower these impacts. So we're really trying to first of all, understand where our impacts are, back to the original question, so that we can figure out where we have direct control and influence over decisions that we can make. But then taking that a step further, where do we see that we have this much bigger opportunity to continue to drive down impacts, but where we need to work with others, even brands that are competitors to us that we know are operating in these same exact supply chains. How can we work together on this really common goal to, again, help us help you kind of reach these goals together, because they really are so much bigger than one brand or even one industry. So, I think we have to be really cognizant of like how we use this data and information to create that change across our product profile, but also across our supply chain.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Such a comprehensive answer. And also, I really love what you mentioned about the collaboration aspect of things, because at the end of the day, you only have so much influence over a supplier. But if a bunch of you kind of band together and ask the right questions, you can ensure that you get an answer. So that's awesome. Uh, Dr. Muthu, like I'd love to hear from you on this as well, especially when it comes to the idea of with LCAs. There's a way to identify these issues, like what Katina said on process and improvements, and that's hotspot analysis. So I'd love to get a perspective from you on that as well.
Right. I just want to touch upon what you guys, discussed about in the previous one, like in terms of collaboration. I want to tell you some of my LCAs. I want to tell you maybe in few countries for few suppliers, the LCA what I have done, they were collaboratively requested by few brands together. So that was really awesome. So what you said, like if 5 brands are, requesting certain improvements, certain level of improvements from a supplier, that makes a big difference. So this is happening, and I'm sure there's a long way to go. We talk about transparency, traceability, collaboration in a very big way, but I'm sure, and I'm very positive that it has to be in action very soon, to a larger extent. So to answer this question, I think it was partly answered before by myself and also by Katina. What I want to tell you is that in terms of getting LCA as a best guide to find out the way forward for brand, not only brand, be it a brand, retailer, or manufacturer, whoever wants to alleviate the impacts, understand the impacts, and work towards reducing the impacts. There are few things I want to touch upon. Most of the things Katina has already spoken about. There are a few things I want to really supplement with. One is we touched upon finding the right experts. So right experts. So for if you earmark few products, not all products will have same level of impact. For example, when I have let's say a denim pant, and it has a, let's say, KMNO4 spray, potassium permanganate spray, and it has a pertinent processes typical for a denim manufacturing. So I have to find out what could be the impacts which are really, really pertinent to this particular product, and where could be the havocs with this product supply chain. For example, I have to measure, let's say, eutrophication, human toxicity with 1,4-dichlorobenzene equivalents. There are few impacts I have to earmark. So I have seen many studies. There is a world of differences between what is the product specific impacts and what impacts are measured by a practitioner. This is why I can say that most of the LCAs are accused in the social media. So this is one of the things. If a LCA is done with this, it can't be a best guide. So yeah, again, I want to touch base with the previous answer what I've given. And for brands, manufacturers, retailers, I have experienced. So that they kept LCAs in the center of decision making. I can tell you most of my LCAs were used to make decisions. For example, sourcing decisions, changing suppliers, transportation modes, procuring raw materials from different suppliers, and choosing a chemical. For example, for one of the brands, I did a screening LCA study because it was very quick. We just measured the human toxicity of different adhesives for a particular, let's say, shoe, and then they just made a comparative assertion between their own supply chains in terms of chemicals, and then they figured out which is the best one in terms of least human toxicity, least footprints. So yeah, keep LCAs as a crux of your decision making. And we talked about beginning with the supply chain assessments. all aspects. Then when you have factory level considerations, they have to be assimilated at product level, then have a collective decision through the LCAs. And of course, when a LCA practitioner, for example, I'm doing LCA and I'll give, let's say, 15 recommendations. Of course, you can't do everything at one go. There are certain goals. You can keep it as a short term, medium term, and long term. Of course, when you work with someone experienced as me, so we'll tell you, okay, this is all you can immediately do. This is in the next horizon. Maybe you can do like maybe in a 6 months time, 6 months frame, or maybe 1 year span. This is what it is, and this is how you can leverage the alleviation of impacts, and so as the benefit of reduction of impacts. And with this, any LCA study done on Earth, the very purpose is to find out the hotspots, find the low hanging fruits, and build up from that. And I've seen many studies, they talk about, okay, we have measured this, and the conclusion. The very purpose of the LCA itself is defeated. So there is no fun in having such LCA. So any LCA has to have this. If you have LCA like this is a completely ill-faced. And this is why, LCA cannot be treated as a best used to guide, guide for sustainability path for anyone, brands, retailers, or manufacturers. So these are all needs to be done. So once this is all done, and make a clear pathway, short term, medium term, and long term. Again, once you do short term, don't forget, try to do it again. So that's what we do always. Akhil, I also have a lot of dialogues with you. So most of the LCs, what we do, we have to revisit them. Okay, 6 months later, what's happening? Did you work on all these recommendations? So okay, and what is the new fate? Don't think your fate was sealed. No, you can of course always break the seals. So we are here to give you all the ways to work towards reducing the impacts. Revisit them. Okay, this year and again talking about Katina, I always tell all my clients, all my folks in the network, don't think that you want to benchmark with X, Y, Z. Don't do that. Benchmark yourself. Okay, how I am in 2022. Okay, I worked with Dr. Muthu. I've got LCA done with him. So these are the points I've been given with. Okay, 2023, what I'm going to do. So you have to compete yourself. This is what is the healthy competition, and this is what industry demands. This is something I've been telling since 2008. Don't compare your products. Okay, and this is where most of the issues are stemming from. Okay, I compare, let's say, conventional cotton, and I want to slash other product. Okay, you tell your practitioner, okay, I want to compare it with wool. Come on, where is wool? Where is cotton? So this is where the textile sense comes from. Where is the functional aspects? Where is the functional limit? It's completely gone. So LCS have to be done this way, and make yourself as a competitor. For you, you compete yourself. How I was last year, how I am this year, how am I going to be in couple of years down the lane? And this is what industry is demanding. This is something I've been telling since 2011, and I will keep repeating. And I'm sure days are not very far. Industry will really be moving towards this direction. Akhil, I hope I answered your question.
Right. No, absolutely. Thank you for that. So I think one thing that's obvious is definitely understanding the hotspots and kind of seeing where improvements can be identified. And there's a few kind of parameters around that, which is like, I would say, overall a stakeholder assessment to kind of see what are some of the things that you can influence. And one thing that both of you emphasize in a sense was the idea of using that assessment that you've done to identify where you can have the most impact, not just the low hanging fruit, but the ripest of the low hanging fruit in a sense. Just stress that analogy a little bit. So awesome. So thank you for that. And the last question is something, and I'm seeing a lot of questions pop up in chat as well, but I think this question does address a lot of that, is really about the whole greenwashing and misinformation thing. And also in general, there's a lot of anti-greenwashing legislation that's already in place. There's a lot that's coming up around supply chain traceability and the need to, back up what you're saying in around LCA claims. Comparatives are always a very tricky issue, and Dr. Muthu just touched on it. But there's a lot more to it. So if as a brand, especially if they want to combat misinformation and avoid greenwashing and ensure you're kind of staying abreast of greenwashing legislation, what's kind of the best way forward, right? Like, what are some of the steps that a smart brand should be doing in order to get things right?
Shall I go?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I think this is an incredibly complex question and probably an even more complicated answer. But I think at face value, I think it's always a good rule of thumb to just stick to the facts. And I think many times we just don't quite know what the specific impacts are. So we've talked a lot about LCA methodology and how specific and precise some of those data and details can be. So again, back to Dr. Muthu's point of if you remove a print or if you change a process or if you change a raw material, you kind of have to go back and reassess what that new LCA, what those new LCA impacts are for whatever it is that you're talking about. So LCAs in a very real sense, I think, represent that moment in time, which is why we really like to use it as kind of a measurement tool behind the scenes. I think, for a responsible brand or for anybody that wants to be operating in this space, there also needs to be that communication or translation into your consumer facing metrics or communications or marketing. I think we will do ourselves a disservice if we don't continue to try to translate this message or the learnings to our customer, because we really need to bring them along the journey. And it's part of the package. This is who we are. Ultimately, we need them to stay in business, so we need to kind of gather them, garner them on our sides, and help them, just educate and build that awareness. I think where many people get into tricky waters is where LCA information, primary data about a very specific process or material or region, gets used as proxies across something similar but very different in practice or in the outcome. And whenever you use that as a proxy for just understanding or trying to get a directional sense of maybe where you need to go, it can be very powerful. Because again, LCAs are incredibly time consuming. They can be very expensive to perform, which I think is a barrier to why more brands don't do them, or why even as Everlane, who's very interested in this topic, we've only been able to perform a handful because of the costs and kind of the time expenses that go into performing them. So it's not something that we can do on every single product, but we can use some of those learnings and information and details to be able to get a directional understanding of where some of our other impacts lie for the products that we haven't yet been able to perform LCAs on. I think where you get into that challenge is if you're using those data points that aren't based on primary, secured, credible information, and you're using it as a sales tactic or in a way that is pushing a product or a material over another. And I think we're kind of operating in a very interesting time, because a lot of this has been happening for many, many years. And it seems like regulatory bodies and other kind of consumer watchdogs and industry activists are really starting to pay attention right now. And I think we see this playing out in a very real way, particularly in many European countries. And so it's really interesting, I think, to watch. It's like a watch this space kind of moment to see how these items are going to be regulated, so that we can provide that clarity for how you can speak to different impacts. I will say there is an incredible complexity in doing this and doing it right. Even if you do have that primary data that you feel very secure in, and you can communicate through a verified LCA about a pair of jeans or a sneaker, as an example, I think that your run-of-the-mill customer does not necessarily understand how those impacts translate. And so there's still this gap in understanding. And I think that's where the translation of like a very scientific measurement and study, bringing that into in a fun way, that maybe not fun, that's the wrong word, but in an engaging and interesting way, to bring that information to the customer so that they can understand what 7 kgs of carbon dioxide equivalent means and what that means to them, it's a very difficult thing to accomplish. And that's something that we really challenge ourselves to do every day at Everlane, is how do we make these very real impacts come to life so that our customers can really understand it, and feel good about the purchase that they're making, but also really feel like this is a product that took a certain amount of impact to create, and I need to cherish it and care for it and have the longest life possible with this item, so that it's not sort of, in vain, so to speak.
Awesome, thank you for that. And there's a very fair point in the sense of the nuance around LCAs, right? It's a number that you get, but there's a lot more to it. And I'm always an advocate, even when we're designing with the Green Story system, there is a easy front-facing number that you get, which is like the 7 kgs number or whatever it is, and baseline against X, Y, and Z. But I always think there is a need for layered communication, which is the idea you can click on the number, find more details, read up on the supply chain, so you can really go in depth and understand that. And it's kind of a balance, because you can't give it all in one go. You can't, somebody shopping at your website, you can't say, here, read this LCA report first. You kind of have to lead them towards that, right, across their customer journey. So that's a very fair point. Dr. Muthu, what I'd like to understand from you for this question especially is like, there are a lot of pitfalls involved in LCA as well. And I think this is where a lot of brands actually unknowingly perhaps greenwash, even if they are doing LCA. So it'll be great to kind of understand from your side, what those are, and also where the whole there's a lot of hype now around the PEFCR guidance. If that's a good starting point, and there was a question from someone around that, if that's perhaps if you want to do it at scale and kind of even communicate your impact, that's a good starting point for a brand.
Absolutely, that's a wonderful question. Pitfalls, I think, to talk about pitfalls, we need a couple of hours to speak about. But I'm sure you're going to give me a couple of minutes to speak about pitfalls in LCA.
You have 8 minutes, so.
Yeah, so yeah, I'll try to cover as much as I can in a very concise way. There are a lot of big mistakes. Maybe let me list a few pitfalls, again, knowingly or unknowingly. First one is not following the right standards, and even when you follow the standard, there are methodological approaches which have been set. How to define a function unit, how to define a reference flow. I'm sorry, I don't use too many technical jargons. From the audience, it's a mixed community of people who understand LCA and who don't. So I just want to cater to the needs of everyone. So I don't use too many technical jargons, but I want to tell you. So the standards have been prescribed, set, and it's been followed for quite some time. So when we look at a lot of studies, we can say that there is they are really far from what's been standardized in terms of approach, in terms of allocation factors, in terms of in terms of references and other main issues that I can see that. Okay, I also wrote in one of my LinkedIn posts before. Even though we can get primary data, LCA is not a magic or gimmick. It is a mathematical model. So we have to create an input-output model. It works with a mathematical principle. Of course, it's woven with hypothesis, equations, formulae. So it's a mathematical model. One has to understand. So we need foreground, background flows. We have to work with data sets, databases, such as eco-invent. And again, not everything can be filled with these references, what I said. For a LCA study to be commissioned, you might need to fill few data gaps or more data gaps with different other sources. So the problem stems from here. For example, people think Google is always my best friend. Just Google it, okay? 1 kg of organic cotton. And I must be, I feel very blessed, and I must be very thankful that when I did my PhD, Google was not that developed. So I had no other choice. I have to just go and measure everything. I remember I did a few studies for 6 months. Overnight, I have to sit. You can't sleep. Biodegradation when you study. So the moment the graphs are going down, you have to really go and take the next measurement. So that's how we did all the LCS, including eco-function parameters. So now you have Google. So they just Google it, and they refer to some study. Look, take it from me. Each study is completely different. Even though you take a study, for example, you are from, let's say, some part of the world. I don't want to name any specific part. Let's say you're from Hong Kong, and there is a study done from Hong Kong, from your neighboring factory by someone else. Take it from me. You can't take that study because that study scope is different. That study's boundaries are different. That study's assumptions and the practitioners scope, vision, and his way of looking at the parameters would have been different. So you can't simply take it. So having said about within the same geography, people take, okay, they don't think of anything, just Google it, find something, incorporate into that, and they make it. This is where the misinformation stems from. And once you take this, it leads to greenwashing. Very simple. So I want to tell you, Google is not always your good friend. Please talk to right experts. They are always your good friends. Tell them what you want. And next one, when you want to commission a study, be very clear. If you ask me, I want to do LCA study. Like a lot of people who are attending the webinar, they all worked with me. Some of them would have worked with me before. I can see some names. So you must have, you can recall. I would have asked you, what is the very purpose of this study? What are you going to do with that? So, this is where, the practitioners will get a sense. Okay, if you intend to communicate to public, mostly we have to do with primary data. If you want to say it's only just for my reference, I want to understand, and I can't really spend that much amount of data. You can't go to that level of depth. So, there are a lot of ways, but of course, everything has to be in a standardized way. Standard has made all the provisions and one has to follow, right? And when we talk about the sources, please go for peer-reviewed sources. Peer review. Don't take any LCA study on earth. That's not really going to help. And if you do that, even peer-reviewed study, you have to look into what could be the scope, boundary. Is it exactly related to your context of your study? Otherwise, you can't do that. And once you get the data, do benchmark. So I want to tell you, with my experience so far, every number, whatever I've done so far, I bear the responsibility. I know what it is. Is this number really good enough? Is it been benchmarked? If not, why? So I have the answers for that, why it is. So now we do a lot of LCAs in Green Story. Every number we analyze critically, we check, we benchmark, we do industrial checks. If it is not falling within the group or within the scale, we just don't adapt it. So this is what everyone has to do, and this is what LCAs have to be done. If any LCA is being done this way, this really helps to combat the misinformation, and absolutely there is no question of greenwashing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I think we have just a few minutes left. A couple of things I do want to point, because I did have discussions with both of you before, was, Katina, you mentioned a point about definitely reining in your marketing counterparts. So a lot of it is definitely communicating to them in the right way, because I think a lot, they might see a positive piece of news and really expand on it without the nuance. So that seems to be like a really important thing for brands to communicate internally. And Dr. Muthu, you did mention some principles to keep in mind, and there is a question that came out on some of the key principles and takeaways when you're communicating. But I feel it's really about ensuring that the data is credible, and it's also not static. You can't say that you're sustainable or you have done everything. It's an evolution that any brand is doing. Even Patagonia, or a brand that's very far ahead, they're still kind of building out the transparency, building out visibility and the impact, and keeping on improving. And on top of that, make sure that there is that authenticity with the data, making sure the primary data is there, it's verified as much as possible, and just be transparent to your end
Nailed it.
consumers and across the team on it, so they really understand what's going on. So thank you so much, both Katina and Dr. Muthu. Like, this was an incredibly detailed discussion. I feel like I could let this go on for another hour, and we wouldn't cover half the topics that we discussed. So thank you so much, and thank you so much for everyone for attending. This has been such an amazing webinar. So just keep in mind that we are actually going to have a recording that's going to be sent out, and we will be responding to your questions. There's over a dozen of them that I see that we didn't get to over email as much as possible, and allowing Katina and Dr. Muthu to have a chance to respond as well. But yeah, really appreciate everyone coming in. So thank you, Dr. Muthu, thank you, Katina, and thank you, everyone. And watch out for our next webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Have a good one.